Good afternoon and welcome to the September 11th meeting of the Pinehurst Village Council. If you will, I will ask you for a moment of silence in remembrance of the horrible ordeal, September 11th, 17 years ago. Please bow our heads. Thank you all very much. The first item on our agenda, we have reports, first from our manager. Jeff?
Good afternoon. I think the only thing I wanted to address today is the state of our preparations for the storm coming this weekend or later this week. We have been meeting as a staff over the last couple of days, kind of refining our position and figuring out what we need to do and how we can better prepare for the event. And I'd like to give everybody kind of an update on where we are. The first thing I'll say is that we made the call this afternoon to cancel the Live After 5 event on Friday. It looks like the weather's going to be pretty bad on Friday evening, so that probably wasn't going to work out. With regard to specific preparations that we've done to date, public services folks have gone out and checked all storm drains to ensure that they're not blocked, to make sure that we can help to mitigate what we expect to be potentially very significant stormwater challenges across the village over the coming days. We have begun to check our backup generators. I know we did the one here at Village Hall either yesterday afternoon or earlier today. I think we still need to do that at the fire stations and the police department. We have arrangements with local contractors to help to assist with storm debris cleanup. But as we were reviewing the framework that we have in place for those services, we realized earlier today that the documentation is not in line with new FEMA requirements that were published or went into effect on 1 July. So we are making an effort to get that straight so that we will be in line for FEMA reimbursement for those services if and when we have to use them. Melissa's done a great job of advocating for storm preparedness measures on our social media platforms, and it also has a pretty good VOP hurricane preparedness webpage that you can access off of our main VOPNC webpage. A lot of good information there for folks to take advantage of. We are in the process of developing 48-hour manning models to carry our response forward into this event. We may or may not actually use those models depending on what we see as the severity and the duration of the response that would be required. But the thought is that if we can come up with a good 48-hour manning model for an event like this, we can probably carry that forward indefinitely. And I know, at least from the council standpoint, you probably are aware that in some emergency situations in the past, we went out with full steam ahead and we kind of ran out of gas after 24 hours, and we had to go into a pause, and that caused some challenges and concerns across our community. So we think we can do better on that, and we're working to do so. We've ordered food to feed up to 50 responders through the weekend, and the prep of that food will take place at the fire department. We've been educating our key leaders on FEMA funding requirements. I talked about that a little bit earlier, and with respect to documentation required for reimbursement. And we have also drafted a state of emergency declaration. That's ready to go off the shelf. Some have taken note that Moore County declared a state of emergency earlier today. Staff position on that with regard to the Village Pinehurst is there's no hurry. With regard to the actual implications of the state of emergency language that we have drafted, all it does is tell people to stay off the roads unless it's an emergency situation. So we don't need to rush into that. We aren't trying to minimize the gravity of the potential situation we're going to be facing this week, but we can continue to monitor the progress and projected track of this storm and issue that state of emergency if we need to. We may be standing up our Village Emergency Operations Center in the fire department as early as Thursday evening. That's, again, we're going to monitor the situation going forward. I will tell you that this time yesterday, I was pretty convinced that we were going to do it and actually do it a day earlier, but the weather, the hurricane forecasts turned a little bit pretty decidedly in our favor. In what really were some minor ways in terms of the actual track of the hurricane, but they were significant in terms of the impact here in the Village of Pinehurst area. And so we've delayed that potential activation of the EOC until Thursday evening, and we'll see what we do on that. With regard to the EOC, that will be the location where we command and control our entire response effort, including coordination with external agencies. And to support that, we will be, if we stand up the EOC, we will be activating a link off our 295-1900 phone line that goes right over here to the Village Hall. It's the most common number that everybody references when they want to call the Village of Pinehurst. And there will be a prompted menu system on there that will allow folks to link directly over to the EOC, and then our operators in the EOC will direct the call as required based on the type of situation or request for response that is being made. We will have emergency dispatchers seated in the EOC, and they will route the requests either to fire or to police or to public services or to other agencies or other people in the village staff as required by the situation. With regard to the storm, I mentioned the fact that there were some minor changes to the projected track that occurred overnight that were beneficial. What we're looking at right now in terms of what the information we're getting from the National Weather Service in Raleigh is a potential landfall Thursday night or Friday morning. Looks like what they're saying is close to 2 a.m. on Friday morning, and it will make landfall as a major hurricane. About 24 hours later, or about 2 o'clock on Saturday morning, they're projecting it to have dropped to a tropical storm. That's good news because the previous forecast showed it still being a hurricane and further inland. But what they're showing is a tropical storm that's centered in an area that looks like it's east of Fayetteville. And again, that's really good news for us because we thought we were going to be dealing with hurricane force winds 24 hours ago. Now it looks like it's going to be at the most tropical storm level winds. We think that we might be able to we may start to see the significant impacts of this in terms of wind and rain and stuff as early as Thursday evening, but it's probably going to be the most severe overnight on Friday and Saturday morning, and probably depending on whether or not it stalls out in the area or moves out, and a lot of that is really uncertain at this time. We may see it kind of clear out over the weekend, or we may see extended, particularly rainfall challenges into early next week. Right now, based on the forecasts that we got from the National Weather Service, with regard to those hurricane force winds, they're saying that in all likelihood we have about a 70% chance of getting tropical storm force level winds here in this area around Pinehurst or southern Moore County, and that corresponds to 39 or greater miles per hour wind to meet that threshold of being a tropical storm level winds. The other thing, apart from the fact that the storm is coming in is moving slower, and it's going to be downgrading faster as it comes inland from a hurricane to a tropical storm. The other significant thing is its projected path, or most likely projected path, shifted just a little bit north, and that was significant because it's more likely that we're going to be on the dry side of the rotation for that hurricane. So yesterday we were looking at probably somewhere, I think, on the order of 7 to 10 inches of rain that we're going to come from this storm. Right now, the forecast is for 3 or 4 inches. Now, having said that, if you think about that cone you always see in the forecast, this stuff is driven off kind of the center of that cone, and if that track actually goes, south in that cone such that we wind up on the north side of its track, we're going to see a lot more rain. And that rain, as we saw with Matthew, can be a real challenge, particularly when it's coupled with high winds, because you get that root saturation and the winds just knock the trees right over. So that's kind of where we stand with the storm and our preparedness for it. I don't know if anybody has any questions on those comments.
Any questions for Jeff about our preparations for the storm?
Just a side question. In preparation for the storm, the one and done is Monday through Thursday. Would you be pulling staff away from the Thursday one and done pickup to move in preparation, or would the Thursday one and done proceed as scheduled?
We intend to try to get through our solid waste pickup so that we don't have a backlog going into next week. Jeff, you want to add to that?
Yeah, latest news is landfill will be closed Thursday and Friday, which now may augment what our game plan had been. So we're still massaging that on Thursday, what to do. The Urory, where our materials do go to, up in Montgomery County, would be open, so we could transport there. So this is something we're going to have to. We just found this out within the last 30 minutes, so we'll be figuring out what to do with that tomorrow.
Well, I understand if possible, we should try and put our solid waste containers and others indoors, or at least maybe lie them on their sides or something so that they won't, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, to the point that, to the extent that you can secure anything outdoors that is, likely to potentially blow away, whether that's the carts or your lawn furniture or all those things. So.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Okay. First, I'd like to welcome back Mr. Cashin. Mr. Cashin went to our fine medical facility, and he had a little tune-up. And as is his tradition, he only missed one meeting. And if he could have got out of the hospital for that meeting, he would have. But they wouldn't let him leave. So welcome back, John.
Thank you. And I spent, out of the last 6 weeks, the Heart Read Center by having a double bypass for the last 6 weeks. And so as of today, I'm back at work, if that's what you call it.
He's back to work. That's it.
Such. And I have to say that we have some great medical facilities around here, and we shouldn't even give it a second thought, because they actually are very good at what they do.
Thank you, John. I just want to mention briefly that I had the distinct honor of presenting a certificate to Mr. Roy Hanna, who lives at Quail Haven. He turned 102 today, and he's very spry, and he was kind of insisting that I kiss him on the cheek, so I did, and then he was just a very, very nice older man, not a nice young man, but from time to time, Quail Haven does invite me or someone else to the birthday parties, and they're just very, they just give delightful, events. I couldn't stay because of our meeting, but they were playing the piano, they were going to have cake, and so it was just a raucous time over there at Quail Haven today. Okay, Kevin?
No, I have nothing to add, but I just had a pen explode, so I'm going to leave and be right back to the restroom. So
Okay.
I'm going to use my time.
Okay, your pen exploded. All right, you're excused. Mr. Baldry?
Nothing, no ma'am.
Judy?
I just want to remind people that on your mobile phone, there's an app you can get called MyVOP, and when we walk all around the village or do whatever we do, we see things that the staff can't see. This morning, I took a picture of a stormwater drain that I wanted to be sure got attended to, so you're liable to see things like that. Obviously, if it's an emergency, you'll call the right people, but be the eyes and ears of the village, especially before and after a storm. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, I think that's it. We can, I'm sure Kevin will be back in a minute. Did you have anything else, John? Okay. All right, the next item on our agenda is our consent agenda. And these items are all considered routine and can be enacted under one motion. Do we have a motion for our consent agenda?
I move to approve all items listed and considered routine on the consent agenda.
Second?
We have a motion by John Baldry and a second by John Cashin. Is there any further discussion? If not, let's vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Thank you. I think that's unanimous. I think Kevin would vote
Kevin,
again.
say aye.
Unanimous. Okay.
Put on a committee or something, wow.
Yeah, right, you're put in charge.
By the way,
Sit down.
Next is number 4, which is an amendment, discussion of an amendment to our development ordinance. Is that?
Yeah, and this, and I know all the council are aware, but for the audience's benefit, this is a continuation of a discussion that started at your last meeting with the application for a text amendment to our development ordinance.
Welcome, Alex.
Are we good now?
I think so.
Thank you. So again, as Jeff mentioned, last month's meeting, there was a public hearing held to consider a text amendment that would allow the OP, Office and Professional, as well as the NC, Neighborhood Commercial Districts, and lumped in with the VC, VMU, VCP, and VR districts that would give council the ability to waive some or all the buffering requirements associated with certain developments. The application was made by Vincent Wade, and based on some of the dialogue at the public hearing, there was some questions as far as standards, maybe further analysis and site visits. Your packet has been somewhat updated from the last month's meeting to include some maps that staff have prepared to show clearly, maybe a little more, if you will, those potential parcels where a development could occur that may possibly look at waiving some of those buffering requirements. And the exact locations that you'll see there are ones that would have a more extensive buffer based on the way the ordinance is written, based on the location along highway corridors, if you will, as well as those properties that abut adjacent residential uses. And within those two, you will see contour lines that, as data that we get from the county, each one of those yellow shaded lines would represent a 2-foot change in elevation, as topography is something that has come up and could be a potential contextual situation in which there may be a cause for waiving some buffering requirements. Additionally, I'll be glad to discuss further any questions, concerns.
Alex, I'm looking at the map of NC5, and I think I see the property that is in question. So just give me a little idea of what these colors mean. Oh, wait a minute, okay, vacant, and, oh, I see that, okay. So there are several of those parcels that are vacant, neighborhood commercial, and office and professional. Now, if we look really behind, in the back of Trotter Hills, is that developable land, or do those contour lines make it difficult?
All of it should be able to be developed.
So there's one parcel back there that isn't in the dark purple. Why would that not be subject to the buffer requirements?
And again, this is just to, as best analysis as can be put in with a map.
Okay.
The shaded area is based on data that we get from Moore County, where we can do without getting too technical with our mapping software, we can do a buffer and intersect of the information with each parcel based on whether it is got a tax classification as vacant or improved. So the light shaded parcels should be those that came back as a improved note when we did that software run. So there may be something, some structure on that property, or as you see, even the street lines are also shaded that lighter color.
That's where the medical offices went.
Way back,
Yeah.
way back on Trotter
Yeah, on the
Hills.
backside of Trotter Hills.
Which parcel is the dental office being developed on?
It's the one to the, is it directly north of, or the two lots down?
It's 2 lots up. If you look at your map, it's right abuts the abbreviation for circle.
Okay. And that's the dental office that's being?
Correct.
Okay. So the dental office will be subject to the buffer standards that we currently have?
That's correct, and they have, as you may have noticed, they've got full site plan approval, and they are working feverishly to finish that. So they have presented and got approved for the full landscape buffer that is required by the ordinance.
Okay. Okay, any other questions from council?
Just to go back over and revisit what our process is, because last time I asked, in adopting the changes to the ordinance, an applicant would come, and help me if I'm saying something incorrectly, Alex, they would come directly through the staff to the council without going through the planning and zoning board.
That's correct, and that's one thing that staff has discovered with the way the ordinance is written. It doesn't really give a clear process in which, and it's not a public hearing per se, which would take the statutory requirements. That would go through the planning and zoning board with the notifications, and then back to you guys with the appropriate notifications that would need to be done too. So there's not a clear outlined procedure for that, but I would understand that an applicant would come before staff and obviously have some concerns over whatever required buffer would be there, probably make a case and an argument to staff as it happens, and have to provide some contextual situation and some argument. I would, not speaking for you guys, but you would want to understand why their argument would be in the best interest of the public.
Could you help me with what is the criteria by which the staff would review an application with respect to landscape architecture?
Part of the site plan procedure, a substantial plan set for what we call the full construction set will be submitted that goes through the TRC, and within that there is a significant landscape plan that has to show full requirements for all our landscaping and screening standards, with call-outs for what's being used to meet that criteria. And again, that's reviewed by the full technical review committee for those that may not know TRC.
Does the staff have any leeway at all in lessening the requirements?
There is one provision a little further down in that section of our buffering requirements that gives the village planner, which, as the ordinance states, is the planning inspections director or their designee, to waive up to 30% of the buffer width and plantings if with using alternate landscaping, berms, fencing, etc., and if the net result is equal to or greater than the initial intent, which is outlined in the very beginning of the planted buffer section, which is that the setting should be where man-made development is situated within a forest with the typical ecosystem look of the sandhills.
Has the applicant made that request that you
Just yesterday, we received, staff did a potential alternate landscape plan that we are currently reviewing to see if it, in the village planner's opinion, can meet that criteria.
that would be staff's opinion?
That's correct.
But first, before you do anything like that, we have to address this, do we not? We have to address this text amendment?
And again, I know this was reiterated a lot last month too. This proposed text amendment is not necessarily site-specific, as it would
Right,
affect
right.
village-wide, whereas a potential alternate landscape plan would be site-specific,
This is the first time this has come up, though.
to my knowledge.
So it seems to me that, to accept this text amendment, we are opening things more broadly than need to be opened up. It becomes a little bit like my golf game. The only thing consistent about my golf game is its inconsistency. And I don't think we want ordinances that work like that. And so it's a concern I have.
Sounds like your golf game is better than mine. But I know that was a concern that was brought up as well. It could be, Kevin, if I can quote you, a slippery slope. And typically, these type of standards are handled administratively. So that may be something we need to look at holistically moving forward, our ordinance as well.
And I think we want you to handle those administratively, too.
I feel a little more comfortable knowing that there is something that the staff can do administratively to waive by 30% as long as the spirit of the ordinance is in keeping with the spirit of the ordinance.
I always like the idea of being, it's consistent, there's some consistency across the applicants when they come in, with leeway for varying or applying or approving a variance to the degree that the ordinance says. But I think consistency and applicability are things that, about how it's administered. It's the execution part of this that, not that there should not be a process for someone to come in and request a variance. It's just the applicability and how it's applied, and again that we're consistent in how we think about it and how it's applied.
It sounds like we're moving toward option 3. Does the applicant want to make any comments at this time, Perry? Come on up.
And I'm representing the applicant here. But just, I wanted to clarify something that part of the discussion from the map that was up at on the screen. One of the issues that we're looking at is how a prescriptive ordinance is applied to all contextual situations without regard of that context. And that's one of the reasons why we applied for the text amendment, because there are certain zoning districts that are allowed to apply to the village council for some relief from some of the requirements. But only some of those zoning districts are allowed that opportunity. NC and OP districts are not. And I wanted to clarify something. When the previous map was shown regarding the developed and undeveloped property along Highway 5, if you look along Highway 5, there are probably 35 to 38 properties that front that highway corridor. And the part of the ordinance, one of the parts of the ordinance that we think context should be a consideration of is this 30-foot buffer along certain highway corridors and how that's applied. Because it is a buffer, essentially a screen, to block your view between a business and the road that it fronts. Now, we have parts of that, it's a holdover from the Highway Corridor Overlay District that's now part of the landscape requirements. But this is applied equally to properties on 211, 15501, and Midland Road, and Highway 5. But then if you look at how it's applied on Highway 5, there are 35 or 38 properties that front that corridor. But the ones that I show in green are the only 4 that that requirement applies to. None of the other properties, both developed and undeveloped, even if the developed properties were redeveloped, none of those other properties have that requirement. None of those other properties have a buffer between their business and the road. So there's a context that's already been established for that area. But none of the properties shown in green have the opportunity, right now as the code is written, to appeal that requirement to any extent, whether in part or in full. And what this text amendment is seeking is the opportunity for, in a case of this buffer, the application of this buffer requirement, or there might be another landscape requirement that's just not applicable given a different, given contextual situation. And it's in the code that the council should take context of the different parts of Pinehurst into account when making decisions on what's appropriate for Pinehurst. And we just want the opportunity to be able to present that case.
The 30% reduction that you would present to staff, that wouldn't be satisfactory
Well,
to your case?
we are trying to pursue the different avenues that may be available to see if there is a compromise position, but for our given instance. But I think that there is a larger contextual issue with this ordinance where some people are allowed rights within the ordinance and other property owners are not allowed those same rights. And if you look at that map, why is it fair that all those other properties can have their business seen from the highway, but not those 4?
Do you think it has anything to do with how the business might look?
Well, could you move on to some of the other shots that I've got?
Or is it that they pre-existed this ordinance?
Well, there was a highway corridor overlay district in the previous ordinance. Some of them may have pre-existed that. But if the highway corridor is something that there is a specific vision and look for that corridor, then wouldn't you want that to apply to all properties along that corridor, even if they were developed, because they could potentially be redeveloped?
Well, I'd say that I want to improve the look along Highway 5. And I think that this ordinance, as it is written, helps do that. And yes, you're right, those might be the only properties that this is being applied to, but it's where we are today.
Well, what about the other 10 undeveloped properties along that corridor? There are 10 other undeveloped properties right now along that corridor where they could be developed and there would be no buffer requirement.
Why is that? Give us,
Well,
hold on, I notice you keep getting up and down. You are the applicant.
Have to go to the mic.
My name is Vincent Wade. I really didn't plan on speaking today. I've practiced, and that's why I'm dressed like this. But anyways, I keep hearing everybody go back and forth on this. So if we look at my lot is the bottom green one there. The next one that's green is the dental facility, and the 2 after that are owned by T.D. Burgess. So it's actually 3 people that this pertains to at this point. I can't say this is true, but I believe that it was just an oversight when the ordinance was created because, it only pertains to those 5 properties. And when the ordinance was created, 1 property was already developed. So we're not trying to lower the amount, the standard. We're trying to get rid of what we call a screen. A buffer is a setback. A screen is total blackout. And that's what the ordinance is going for. So the building that is being proposed to put there is a beautiful building, a wonderful addition to Pinehurst that would just be blocked. And it would just look odd to have it blocked out in one area, wide open, then blacked out again. It just doesn't make any sense. And we weren't asking to have that change. We were just asking for the right to present that to the council. That's
May
what
I
we're
ask
asking
if it looks anything like the insurance building next door?
It does not. No, it's
More commercial looking?
I I'm not good at being descriptive. It's,
Your representative is doing a very good job for you, Mr. Wade. If you have practice, don't worry about it. He's doing a good job.
I don't know
ahead,
how I
Perry.
would describe the architectural style, but it is a different architectural style.
Is it 2 stories?
No, it is not.
Okay.
I want to go back to you saying 10 properties that are not subject to this ordinance. Where are they?
Well, if we look on this map, the darker shaded properties are undeveloped.
The ones on Trotter Circle and behind Trotter Hill Circle?
Well, not, only the ones, I'm only talking about the ones on the Highway 5 directly on the corridor, not the ones behind those properties.
Because
Only
they're
the
not
ones that have
subject
frontage.
to,
along
the
that
highway
right of way.
corridor. They have to be on the corridor. So the ones behind are not.
Right.
I think the point here is that and I think Alex may have to correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is, with regard to this specific highway corridor buffering requirement, the only section of Highway 5 where this extra level of protection, if you will, was deemed to be necessary or appropriate was from Lake Hills down to Trotter Drive, and then only on one side. Now, why only on one side? I don't know if I have a definitive answer. I wasn't here when that discussion took place, obviously, but I think it's some combination of, you can look at the fact that it's, the properties on the east side of the road are already developed, and then you also have the railroad, which may create some legal challenges about whether or not properties actually abut the highway that you're trying to protect. I think that but from a practical sense, when you look at the east side of Highway 5 there's very little that adding that requirement could have done. It's already developed.
Right, and pre-existing, yeah.
Well, if I may, there are properties right now.
Into the
that
microphone,
are-
Perry.
I'm sorry. There are a few properties that are not developed on that east side. The property beside Quality Care Pharmacy is not developed. But Quality Care was developed without a buffer. There's no requirement on that either. The railroad right-of-way, I mean, when you ride down down Highway 5, you've got an extremely clear vision across that. I don't, if the highway corridor if there is a visual protection that is desired upon that, I'm not sure why there would be a difference when it's clearly visible on both sides, if what's visible is really what's important.
I think the point I was making is you can't do anything to it now because it's already developed.
Well, it is not uncommon today for older developments to be redeveloped. And it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility that the undeveloped properties will become developed.
But they would not be subject to these highway corridor overlay requirements.
This particular part of the ordinance would not be subject to, no other properties except the ones shaded in green would be
Okay.
subject to that.
Mr. Cashin has a comment.
Well, what my comment was, when these originally started several years back, and now you got the greens in here, but what, on the corner of where the green is on the bottom there, those were, I think, scheduled to be a bank there at some point by an owner of somebody, I think, that might very well be within this group of lots.
There was a previous site plan for the lot that Mr. Wade owns that was going to be for a bank, but that project was never built.
What happened to the Pizza Hut 2 blocks down the road?
I'm not familiar with Pizza Hut 2 blocks down.
Okay, we can talk about it later.
Is that in Aberdeen? Is Pizza Hut in Aberdeen? Oh, yeah. The Mexican
Oh,
restaurant,
the
yeah.
Mexican restaurant.
Okay, Mexican restaurant, yeah. I do have a concern that we have 4 properties on our highway corridor which are going to be screened, in other words, hidden from view, and one right kind of in the middle that looks pretty darn good. It really does. And it has nothing but foundation plantings, doesn't have any, it really doesn't have anything that goes close to the highway. So I think it seems a little bit, I don't know, I think it depends on the architecture of what is being built.
If I could add to that point, the Riney Agency, when it was built, they were subject to the Highway Corridor Overlay District, which at that point required a 50-foot buffer. And when that was built, it was able to get a variance because of dimensional restrictions based on that overlay district. But instead of reducing the buffer, they didn't put any buffer.
Why did we let them get away with that?
Well, I mean, we don't know the answer to that, but we are where we are. And now we've got to look at where we want to go forward. I think the proximity of these properties to the road is very close, and I think that it warrants and merits some type of buffer. And I don't know if your alternate plan that you submitted can prevail with the administrative leeway that we have or not. But I'm not feeling a case to be called to change the ordinance based upon what I've heard so far. As good a job as you did at presenting it, Perry.
It's unfortunate that a business does not have the right to be seen based on which property on that map that it falls under. I mean, it almost seems like the ordinance was a bit arbitrary.
Well, I think the probability that that property won't be seen is pretty low.
Well, the screening requirements are such that they have to grow up to X number of feet in X number of years, and so it will be, kind of like Hilton Head, won't be seen.
And is that the desire, to be like Hilton Head?
I think, this is a primary gateway into Pinehurst coming out of Aberdeen, and I'm, for one, want to have a character change as you come into Pinehurst and not look so much like a retail strip as it does in the Aberdeen section of 5.
Well, does Pinehurst South look objectionable?
I think this is going to make it look, more flora and fauna that'll be beneficial to the character of the village.
Is there going to be any consideration for the natural habitat and the red-cockaded woodpecker, because these properties are within an active partition, and the screening and the buffering requirement, as stated in the code, is contrary to red-cockaded woodpecker habitat.
I think that's something that council can look at as a separate issue. That's one of the comments that I made, I think, at the last meeting. That is, if there's something generic and relevant that would be true, we can change things there. But I'd say we're getting a little bit out in front of our, the horse is getting out in front of the, we're just getting out in front of our headlights here a little bit. I think you've got a plan, there's an alternate view of it, and I'm not hearing a reason to change our PDO at this point.
The more I look at it, I look at 4 properties that are being treated very differently than the other properties. Now, I know you have some pictures. Do you have some pictures? It looked like you had a slide.
A few of the businesses on that road, and I don't know if you want to see those images, but
The gas station.
they're just more images of what's the context that's already there.
Right. The old social services building. A big tree. What is that? Oh, and the furniture store. Yeah. What is that? I'm sorry?
Dry
Dry
cleaner?
cleaners.
The dry cleaners. Sometimes you have to look at, I guess I'm going to use your word, the context. And if you have 20 properties that have minimal or no landscaping, but you're going to make 4 be screened, and the term screened is not to be seen, not to be seen. When the landscaping grows up, they are not to be seen. It just doesn't make any sense to me now that I look at just 4 properties.
Well, my perspective is I've been unable to deal with your specific issue because I'm trying to deal with the bigger context of the whole thing. And after I deal with that, maybe, but I've been unable to deal with that because your proposed text amendment is so broad, it affects more than these 4 properties. So I think you did a great job. I told you last time of making your case. I think you're going to have an impact on us moving forward on why, what, and how we move forward, but it's just difficult. There is a process, there's a Board of Adjustment process, but you feel you wouldn't meet that criteria of the test of it. There is a process already. There's also an internal process, a 30% process. And I think there should be another process. It doesn't exist right now. And I think that you might influence that existing, but maybe not in time to help you. That's what I guess I just wanted to make sure you know you made an impact. And I don't know if that helps you, but it's just the internal process to me is where you had 4 properties listed. Well, your text amendment affects far more than that. And I think it would be a different discussion if it only affected 4 properties. It's just me. So I feel you made excellent points. So I don't want to take that away from you. I just, and I think dealing with, help me get the words again, the threshold it has to meet, so I don't missay them, the best interest.
The best interest of the public?
Of the
Is that the
public.
way it's worded?
And that's, I think there is something that could happen in the best interest of the public, but we have no tools. I don't know, we're not landscapers up here, and it'd be great for it to go through some other process, maybe the beautification committee, but.
If there are only 4 properties that are subject to this high standard, why not change the standard for Highway 5?
Well, is that true? That's, I guess, is it 4 properties on this text amendment?
Is that true? I mean, we can have our staff.
In that Highway 5 area, there are only 4 properties that are subject to that.
What other Highway 5 area would there be properties subject to it? Because
It would not be on Highway 5, I'm sorry. But on 211, on 15501, on Midland Road, there are
I'm talking
properties.
about just Highway 5. Because we
Highway
can
5.
have a Highway 5 overlay district that has less stringent requirements because of the existing businesses. The existing businesses are never going to have to comply with this, correct? Let me just cite an example. I was a little bit concerned when the eye clinic had to build what we all called the sidewalk to nowhere. I mean, if you see it, it goes like this, and then it drops off. But I was convinced by some folks that someday there will be other developments that will have to add to that sidewalk. Well, this is not the case. There's not going to be anybody else having to add this kind of landscaping that you are going to be required to do. So if we could take just the Highway 5 overlay district and reduce the standards so that they kind of, make the area look more like it looks now. Still tasteful, still, within our, with the best interests of the village in mind. They're beautiful, mature pine trees, and definitely foundation plants and some other landscape. Some of the landscaping would be appropriate, but a screen, I think a screening is more what we would want if we had control over 211, which we don't. We'd want more of a screening, and we would want some, what do you call them? Side roads?
Service roads?
Service roads. Yeah, that's a perfect idea for that. But this is just a very different situation. That's just my opinion. Now, you all can hash out what you want to do. That's how I feel.
So this was the image from the last meeting, where you showed all of the neighborhood commercial and office professional that's, all around, our area. And that's my concern, is that we're looking at what's happening on 5, but there's also other pockets of things going on, and that's why I think we should let the system work where it is, where you can go back and have your alternate plan looked at. And I just really object to changing the PDO for these properties. I think we're better served by keeping that level of consistency, which up till now has not surfaced as an issue for anybody. And the dentist, a couple of feet down, has a Class 3 buffer, I guess is what it's called, that will meet our specs, and they've agreed to that. So.
Can I make an observation?
Please.
I think that, I've suggested in conversations with a couple people before that I thought there might be other ways to consider dealing with this concern, and one of those is what Nancy just suggested. I think that's a more targeted way to deal with this concern. Now, having said that, I think an alternate view of, or maybe the flip side of that same argument, would be that from the standpoint of dealing with the consistency, well, you could also say, let's extend that highway corridor buffer all the way down 5 within our jurisdiction on both sides of the road, so that when, as was mentioned earlier, these properties are redeveloped, then the eventual outcome, whether it's 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now, if we keep the standards the same, is what we're really looking for.
But let's make sure what we're looking for is screening. You don't want to see anything.
I guess I need a point of order to understand. I thought we only had a decision to talk what we're going to do on the text amendment.
That's absolutely
That's
right.
absolutely
We're going
true, yeah.
away.
You got to decide whether to approve
Because
or not.
I do want to
Yeah.
talk about alternatives, but the text amendment goes beyond these 4 properties. So I think that we should always look inside and try to figure things out. But the text amendment is something that we're going to have to deal with, and it goes beyond these 4 properties.
Okay, again, it looks like we're moving towards option 3, which is rejecting. Another opportunity would be to propose a new highway corridor overlay district that would accommodate these 4 properties, that would allow them to be landscaped, nicely landscaped, because we really do want Trotter Hills to be developed, landscaped but not completely hidden, not completely screened. Is there a way to work on another highway corridor overlay district?
Go ahead, Jody.
I'm sorry?
Well, I mean, I think coming back to the point of order, I mean, we either need to accept or reject this, and then we can move on to other things. Is that correct?
And I'd like to talk about it, because I do, like I say, I think there's a case, but unfortunately, the text amendment goes way beyond.
With us being able to have wiggle room is probably not the best way. But personally, I agree that these 4 lots do not need to be screened from sight, screened so that nobody can see them. That's just not the point, I don't think. I don't think it's going to improve Highway 5. I mean, if they're tastefully landscaped, that will improve Highway 5. But that's going to have to be another matter.
May I make a motion with the thunderstorm? Do you need to call for the question now?
Yes, I think we're ready for a motion.
I move to reject the Planning and Zoning Board's recommendation to amend Section 9.5.1.2 of the Pinehurst Development Ordinance for requirements of planted buffers, and I move that the proposed amendment is not consistent with the goals outlined on pages 18 to 21 of the 2010 Comprehensive Long-Range Plan, and is not in the best interest of the public for the council to waive some or all buffering requirements in the office, professional, and neighborhood commercial zoning jurisdictions.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Judy Davis and a second by John Baldry. Is there any additional discussion? If not, I'll ask for your vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. Okay, let me please reiterate that there are 4 or 5 different highway corridor overlay districts that were originally designed some years ago. You probably remember, Perry. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't go in for Highway 5 and look at it as an individual case, because it is mostly developed. It has the railroad that is, an issue on one side. So I would like to ask the staff if they could look at something that would be a little bit less of a screening and more of plantings that complement these properties where there are large pines and there is some significant, well, you said the red cockaded woodpecker.
I think that staff has, many things that have come of this is we see some potentials where we could maybe look at some ordinance changes that could be initiated from the village standpoint.
I think that's what we'd like to see. I mean, that's what I'd like to see. I can't speak
I'd
for the
like,
rest of the council.
and can we talk about those alternatives, just to give some staff some guidance? I think the exceeding, the best interest of the public, that standard is pretty high standard, and I would think extensive landscaping that didn't screen it would qualify under that. I think the public's going to tell us whether it does or not, but I think a beautiful landscaping that doesn't fully block the building but makes it cohesive with the long-term strategic objectives of the village, and it could work beyond Highway 5 corridor, but it has to be a process. It can't just go in front of the council. There has to be some process, Alex. You got to figure out how to create a process for this. But I think they've, like I say, I know I said no, but I think you made a good case, and I think we should investigate ways. It's just the threshold is high, the way it says it, and I think we could figure out how to meet that threshold and not, because a screen is a wall. I mean, if the public wants a wall, they could have it, but I think the beautification that meets the standard of in the best interest of the community, I think it might work beyond Highway 5 corridor. But it shouldn't go in front of the council every time. I don't think we're experts on landscaping. I think we have experts in landscaping we can talk to, So that's all, and I apologize that, that didn't go your way, but I think you've made an impact, and we're going to look at this. Yeah.
Victor, if your practice is outside, I think it's canceled. Is your practice outside?
It's been since baseball practice, and it hasn't been canceled yet.
Hear the thunder?
I hear it, but I haven't got the text yet, so.
Good luck. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have number 5. Who will present that?
Okay, I guess I can take care of this. Fred Engelfred's term as the chairperson of the Board of Adjustments is about to expire here at the end of October, and we would like to recommend that you appoint Julia Latham as the next chairman of the Board of Adjustments.
I might just mention that she comes very highly recommended by Fred, and she is an attorney, and so she's very knowledgeable in the practices.
Isn't even a hurricane yet.
Where are you going, Jeff Baffin? Where are you going? Okay,
Oh, good idea.
It's highly recommended by me, too,
yes.
Julia.
Okay, Julia's highly recommended. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I move to approve Resolution 1819 to appoint Julia Latham as the Board of Adjustment chairperson.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Judy Davis and a second by Kevin Drum. Is there any discussion? If not, let's vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. Thank you. That is unanimous, Beth. Okay, next item, we're going to repeal an ordinance. That's
Yeah,
unusual.
This one needs a little bit of explanation, so I owe it to you. In the consent agenda, everybody probably took note of the fact that you adopted a resolution to honor Doug Tuxbury, who is going to be stepping down in leadership of the Community Watch program. And in dialogue with him over a period of months, we became convinced that based on his recommendation that the Community Watch program should in the future just fall under the direct guidance of the police department. Obviously find professionals there, and I mean, it probably will enhance dialogue and information flow and everything as well. So we want to make that change, and that's really the genesis of why we're having this discussion and why we're asking you to repeal this ordinance. But so when we started looking at how the Community Watch was formed, we found that it was formed on the basis of an ordinance, which is kind of peculiar. It's not the way we have formed any other volunteer organizations in the village framework. And because it's an ordinance, it's a little bit more, you got to come back to you to change an ordinance, do an ordinance to change an ordinance type of thing. From the standpoint of record keeping going forward, we thought the cleanest way to deal with this would be to repeal the old ordinance and then have you adopt a new resolution that then has the Community Watch under the direction of the police department. So that's why you see these two items in your agenda.
Any questions for Jeff?
Just that I thought it was under the police department already, so what do I know?
Dude.
How about, why is it not now? I just got to ask.
There has always been that strong dialogue and liaison, but Doug, he kind of built this organization. And so it's not, I don't think from the standpoint of impact, it's going to have a significant impact on how the Community Watch program operates at the street level and standpoint of the impact on our neighborhoods, other than maybe streamlining information flow.
Great.
Right.
Can we do this on one motion?
Can we do this on one motion, Jeff?
By saying,
And if you want to be creative,
by saying and?
Want to be
I
creative?
think that's
Mr.
okay,
Baldwin?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to, yeah.
I move to approve ordinance 18-19 to repeal ordinance 93-35, and move to approve resolution 1821 delegating the police department to oversee the administration of the Community Watch program.
I'll second that.
We have a motion, two motions really, by Mr. Baldry, seconded by Kevin Drum. Is there any discussion? If not, let's vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. Okay, that is done. Now we have number 8.
That's what we,
Here comes
I'm
Jeff
sorry.
Batten.
Yep. So Jeff Batten's got this one. You may recall some time ago, representatives from the Spring Lake Hills Condominium Association came to the council requesting that you consider adopting the roads in their community.
Welcome.
You might recall Mr. Bill Wood was with us when we discussed this last April. He's president of the Homeowners Association, and so he may have some relevant comments as well for you, or can answer questions
Sure.
that you may have. When we talked about this last April, we had submitted a report to you, which we included in this agenda item for your review, just kind of freshen your memory. And by and large, there's really, I guess, one particular item that is, I guess, a sticking point, if you will, for the village, at least at staff level. And that is what is referred to as a stormwater diversion, which in essence, in your mind, if you think of a speed hump, that's kind of visually what we're talking about here. In conversation with Mr. Wood, I guess the homeowner association is not really desirable of taking that speed hump or diversion, stormwater diversion out. It would set, in our opinion as staff, somewhat of a precedent that we may or may not really want to be involved in. We do get these kinds of requests periodically from that standpoint that I have turned down in past that we do not do.
Speed humps. However,
Stormwater diversions, I've actually had requests for stormwater diversions be placed across the road. I had one as recently as within the last 6 weeks. That I said, no, we would not install that. Now, this is a pre-existing condition, and I think that's from the standpoint of the homeowner association, where they would, I guess, like to present that as kind of the situation. I think it works for their need, based on our conversations, but does not meet our standards. And that's, I guess, the bottom line from our standpoint is to meet the standards would necessitate putting in catch basins, piping, and there's a cost associated with that. Obviously, that would be borne by the homeowner association. We had an engineering estimate done, and it was, I think, between $23,000 and $30,000, so somewhere in that range. So it's not an inexpensive undertaking. However,
Let me ask this. When other people ask you if you can put in this kind of a stormwater diversion, whose cost would that be? That would be us.
yeah, in those cases,
All of us.
it would be the taxpayers, essentially. I mean,
In this case, it's already been put in, and you've already paid for it.
But we would continue to pay for it to replace it every time we resurface the road.
Is it a big problem to replace, though? I mean, I'm thinking of a little bump in the road. I guess that's not it.
It's a fairly reasonable sized bump in the road. There were some pictures in the original report, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe Bill, you guess maybe 6-inch by.
And there's multiple ones, right?
I can't find it on here. Is it on?
Right there in that picture, right there where you're looking at, that one.
This is an actual picture of it working. This is a video of the situation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Wood, you have to start all over because nobody could hear anything you said.
It's all right.
That microphone.
And I missed Barbara going like this.
I have here a video of this water diversion that's been there some 17, 18 years. So I feel like Jeff's talking about not bringing it up to standards. This is up to standard and was engineered many years ago by an engineer, and I brought Don Hiscott here, who can give you the background of doing that. He is the original developer of Spring Lake Hills condominium. But in the meantime, I'll be glad to start this, pass this around to you so you can see actually in working order what we're talking about, okay?
I would like to see it working. Is that okay?
So while he's doing that, Jeff, so this speed bump or stormwater diversion, as you call it, there are multiple ones on that road, right?
There's only the one.
There's only the one?
And that's a great
Okay.
question, because there's a main entrance road that goes into Spring Lake Hills, and there's a loop road.
Yeah.
And this is sitting on the loop road.
Right, okay.
So therein was one of the options, I think, that I presented. You could, if you decided that you wanted to accept the main road, it does meet our standards, with a couple of exceptions, but they're modest exceptions. One's like a turning radius, or at the end of the cul-de-sac. And then not accept the loop road if they wanted to maintain that. That was one option that would be available to council to consider.
So if we don't accept the loop road, then there's no $23,000 to $30,000 expense?
That would be correct.
And then future, keeping that loop road up would be the homeowner association expense?
How does the HOA feel about that?
Well, we're a small HOA. We're 24 people. And we don't have the money to, put in the culvert, number one. And my contention also, and I'm going to let Don speak to this in just a moment, but my contention here is that what is there is up to a standard, and it's working, and it has been working for many, many years. It's not up to the way that they want to do business today. And also, on the other hand, if you put in a culvert and a closed pipe drainage, has a tendency from time to time to clog up. This is an open situation. It never clogs up. So that's something that, you don't need to worry about in the future of coming out and unclogging or putting in new piping or putting in new whatever.
And it's something your homeowners association is willing to live with.
Absolutely. It's been, they're totally happy with it because it works.
Okay.
It just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me to do something that's working and tear it down and put in something that's just different.
Well, Jeff has to look at our standards and what we require, but,
I understand that we're not asking for something new.
right.
We're
if-
asking for something that's already existing, just to be grandfathered in order for you to accept our roads for maintenance.
Now, go ahead, Judy.
So my question is, how does it complicate your management of the streets, Jeff, if it ends there at the beginning of this? What's the incremental
There,
cost?
the additional cost to resurface a road is probably negligible in the grand scheme of things. It is something that we would have to reestablish and keep up if we resurface the roads. The more and greater concern I have is setting a precedent that this is acceptable on a village road. And if it is acceptable on this village road, why is it not acceptable on other village roads? And that's the difficulty that we get placed in from a staff position of having to answer that question. So that's the problem I see.
Right,
Well-
so it's this consistency issue. We have our theme for the night. Because I've also been asked to have us install those types of things into streets in our village, so I understand your
But in
concern.
the name of consistency, this is not our road. We're not taking this as a road. This is not ours.
Or
Correct.
You will be. This is what we're asking for, is that you take this as your road.
I thought we weren't taking the loop road.
No,
That's
no,
that's an option.
No, that's one of the options. We're trying to get you to take the loop road as well as the
Okay.
main road coming in. This seems to be, as Jeff alluded to earlier, a sticking point. We're not asking you to do this. We're not asking to have a new berm or water diversion put in there. And that's what I think Jeff and Ms. Davis here speaking of, is that asking for a new situation to be done. Now, I can say, yes, no, we don't do that. Well, what about that? That is grandfathered in. As many places, many cases, we have things that are grandfathered in. This has been there again for like 17, 18 years. So being grandfathered in, we're not asking for something new to be built.
But I think the point we're making is that in order to get it up to the standards of the village, where it's like everything else that we have to take care of, then either that diversion has to go away, or we have to stop at the diversion so that that's not a village road. That's what I'm hearing to be the choice.
Jeff, can I ask a point of, maybe this is interesting, and I apologize for not having asked you this before, but from the standpoint of our repaving process, what happens when the repaving machine encounters that bump?
Oh, okay, sure, I can tell you. The paving machine is going to stop. And it's going to be no more than 2 feet, is about the width of this bump, as we keep referring to it as. And that would have to be hand paved, which means you take a truck in there, you have somebody that hand puts the asphalt down, and then the same roller that compresses the asphalt can go over that same hump and compress it. So you're talking about a minimum amount of man labor, to put some asphalt down there and then have it rolled over. I mean, you're not talking about a great cost. We're talking about one
Probably
area that's-
comparable to the cost of putting one of those humps on the ground to begin with?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah?
Putting one of those humps in the ground to begin
You
with?
probably would raise it 1.5 inches. If we do it at top dress on the road, it'd be about an inch and
Yeah.
a quarter, about 1.25 inches of asphalt. So you'd have to raise it about another 1.25 inches to keep it, the elevations all working, correctly. What that dollar figure is, I couldn't say right off the top of my head, but it's
Yeah.
probably less than $1,000 in terms of asphalt and man hours for that type of it.
What if we do this? What if we accept the whole thing, and we accept it as it's grandfathered because it was prior existing, and no, it doesn't meet our standards, but until such time as it fails, and then you have to replace it? That was a little too easy. Jeff didn't,
Well, what's the definition of fail is going to be the
Yeah.
problem on that, with that
Now you've
situation.
added so much subjectives. I mean, it's either there or it's not there. I mean, should be pretty black and white.
And with all due respect to Bill here, you know, the correlation between this is, you know, his existing situation and not, you know, someone asking for a new situation, I understand that point, but it's also a bit of akin to a non-conforming use. Are we going to accept a new non-conforming use knowingly? Or is, you know, or do you have to bring it into conformity? Trying to kind of put it into the same, you know, realm, if you will. So, I mean, I don't disagree that I'm sure it works effectively. I don't think that that's the question. I think it's more the precedents and what our standards are requiring, and, you know, whether we're going to adhere to that or whether we're going to, you know, make the exception.
Is there a creative solution where we choose the option which accept the main road and not accept the loop road, that at some future point, we accept the entire thing, you know, instead of stage it? I mean, just for our, I don't know, it's just kind of accomplishing the goal but not having the precedent. I'm just trying to help. I'm going to take your guidance, Jeff, just so you know. So, yeah.
That was the kind of a compromise thought that we had,
Yeah.
Was that perhaps at least we take the bulk of the burden off of the HOA in terms of accepting the main road, which by and large does meet our standards. What's most of importance to us is the subbase and the asphalt top that was on there, and it appears that does meet our standards, and that's the most critical component to the standards overall. But then when you get into a few other things like this that is kind of a little more precedent setting, I think is the one that's a little more concerning to us in terms of dealing with that in the future in other locations. I mean, it's raining now, and so somebody will be calling me tomorrow about you know, something to that effect. But we do periodically get these requests to install diversions, not just speed humps, and you know, we have traditionally rejected those as not something that we do.
Don Hiscott.
Low traffic as well, so.
Don Hiscott has been moving up the line here. I think that standing mic might work.
Does
Don.
this work?
Yes.
Okay. Back some 20 years ago, probably 1997 or early 1998, my wife Brenda and I formed a little company called the Preferred Group, and we bought that piece of property. It was wooded. We bought it from Frank Macer, and what we bought was the land, all the building plans, and the engineering drawings for how the whole thing would work. We went ahead and built those units. And it's a pretty nice development, and I'm very pleased with it. The engineering plans were done by a civil engineering firm, and they designed the, quote, speed bump. By the way, it's 50 feet from one end to the other, and that's in the middle. I don't know how you could ever call that a speed bump. You'd have trouble getting over it.
It was
But
just
anyway,
in the middle of the road.
it was designed by a civil engineering firm in Southern Pines, and I don't remember their name, and unfortunately they're not in business any longer. But it has worked since 1998, and last week I was out of town. I flew into Raleigh on Sunday evening, and as I drove home from Carthage, it rained so hard that I could only drive 50% of the speed limit, and I went into Spring Lake Road and looked at that, and if you could look at that photograph number 5 again, the water was flowing right down exactly where it belonged, into that rock stream, into a retaining pond that's at the back of units 13 and 14 that was required. And it works. And I just think it's a shame to do something else. It's a minimal thing. It's been there for 20 years, and it diverts the water. If it is not there, and there's a problem with a catch basin, units 17 and 18 would be in danger of having their garages flooded. That's the reason it was put there, because all the water that comes from the one side goes right down and is diverted by that water diverter, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, thank you. A good compromise would be for us to take in the part of the road that doesn't have the water diversion on it. Is that something that is acceptable to the HOA?
That is the,
A little closer.
I'm saying, that is, I'm searching for the correct word. It's not that it would not be acceptable. It's something, I guess, that's better than nothing. However, we still would like, if you're talking about having possibly do something in the future that would solve that problem, it's still going to be a cost to us if we have to do that.
If you have to
If we-
pave that part of the road, or if you have to,
So it's going to be a cost to us if we have to pave that part of the road, which again, is still going to be a pretty significant cost. I had a paving company come out and estimate what it would cost to do all of the roads out there, and it was around the $28,000 to $30,000. So we take that portion out of it, we're looking at maybe not half, 40% of that, and it's still a significant cost to us. Now, we're not asking to defray the cost from us to you, but without doing that, again, and the roads have been there for 20 years, if we have to repave today, we can probably expect another 20 years use out of them. So I think the biggest conjecture here, as far as the village and Jeff and the engineer's concerned, is that it's not up to their standards. Well, it's just not up to their way of doing business. It's not a standard practice. And again, I will go back to say, you know, I've been involved in real estate development for a long time. And thank goodness I don't have to be involved in it now. I'm retired. But I know on many instances where things like this have been grandfathered in, and the city or the village or the town or whatever, when somebody else wants to do it, and they use us as an example, which we're kind of hidden back in there anyway. Most people probably don't even know we're there. But if they use us as an example, it's very easy for the village to say, that was grandfathered in. That was there. We're not asking to put anything new. And so I don't see a problem with that. I really don't.
Don?
Just one other brief comment that I forgot earlier. All of this was approved by the village and the village staff when we developed it. We went over the whole thing with the water diverter and everything, and it was all approved.
Okay, we need some thought from other council members. Judy, I think you're pretty clear on not wanting to. I'm a little more willing to, accept something that's grandfathered, and that's what you tell people or have them call me, Jeb, it's grandfathered. How are you feeling about this, Mr. Bouldry?
Well, I think I feel a little better knowing that this has previously gone through the village for staffing and for approval. There's all sorts of things that come up. I think in front of us where something was done years and years ago. I do worry about an exception being made, but in this case, I would like to think we would be on firm ground to say that that this was the basis for this approval would be that we are grandfathering in something that was previously approved by the village.
Under a different set of standards.
How many years ago was this built?
20?
We're only approving 20 years ago, diversion.
Well, it was approved 20 years ago.
I don't know. Precedent's tough for me, but I'll take advice from staff.
You could take a video for us over Friday and Saturday to see what the stormwater runoff looks like then.
Sorry, I don't think we're debating here whether it works or not.
Because it does work,
It
obviously.
does work, and it has worked. And we got just a little under 3 inches of rain 2 nights ago, I think it was, within about a 2-hour period. And it works. So it's not a matter of whether it works or not. It's just, I think the biggest issue here is a matter of whether you're going to call it grandfathered in and not allow new ones, or you're going to not grandfather it. I think that's about where we're at, I think, right now.
Jeff, if we did, do I hear you guys saying you don't want the newer version? I mean, in other words, did I hear that?
We don't, because it doesn't work any better than what we've got.
that
We-
problematic for you, Jeff?
Well,
That you can't, that they're not going to be open for it being consistent with the,
I think the difficulty overall is the precedent-setting situation. That's the biggest challenge with me. I don't disagree with him. I'm sure it works great.
yeah.
But that, it is accepting something that does not meet our standards.
So how big a risk?
And I do not, I don't feel like I certainly don't have the
Well,
authority to do that.
Let me just finish my question, and that is, if we did it to your standard, it sounds like they would be against it. Is that right? Did I hear
I
that?
think their preference would be not to tear
I
out
just
something
I need to hear from you guys on
that
that.
feel like would work.
The primary reason that we would be against that is the cost. And we just don't have the money. Now, if you want to do that and you bear the cost, then we would probably be fine with that. But to do something that's going to cost us $23,000 to $30,000 simply to replace something that's already working is, I think, it's just too much of a burden for us to bear.
Now, we made an arrangement with Cotswold. What was the arrangement with Cotswold? When we annexed them, they paid for a part of their drainage and we paid for another part, or how did we do that?
And it was Hamburg.
It was an assessment, a special assessment that they paid for over time.
The
Right,
entire
I wasn't
thing?
here then, but that's my recollection, yeah.
The entire thing?
I think the village did cover a portion of that
I think we did.
Yeah, the village
Thank
covered
you.
it.
Exchange for the annexation
in
agreement.
exchange for annexation coming in. as
I
part of
think Mr.
negotiating-
Cashin brokered
negotiating.
that deal and said, let's just get on with it. We'll pay for half and we'll assess you for half. And I think it was a good, because we weren't getting any taxes from them. So we're, and obviously you all have been paying taxes for years and years. I like the, it's grandfathered, and it was actually approved by a village council by the village under a different ordinance.
If I might, I mean, we don't, to this day, we don't apply the same standards to approval of private roads that we do to village roads. In other words, I don't think, Jeff, I mean, even today, something like that could be put in on a private development with private roads. Is that true?
Well, we wouldn't encourage that in a new development, no.
Not in a brand-new development. We would not normally approve that type of treatment. They would
On a
have to-
private road?
Private road.
Yeah.
Our engineering standards manual says a private road has to meet the public road standards. Now, if the roads remain private, obviously in a development, and they install something, down the road, that's, they could do that.
Yeah.
In theory.
And we
But
wouldn't
from an
have
approval
any say in it.
standpoint up front, we would not.
Some wording that you could have in it that would help you with the precedent standpoint? I mean, is there some way we could, that we could word this where it doesn't become a precedent?
I think the only way is that it was grandfathered. I mean, it is grandfathered because it was
Built
approved.
20 years ago, yeah.
Over 20 years ago.
Is there any way to assess what the risk would be if we do accept the road with the standard 20 years ago, with others coming in? In your professional judgment, do you think it would be high risk that others would come in and apply the same argument?
Difficult to predict. However, based on what I have been requested to do in the past, it's not inconceivable. I mean, this is not the first diversion that has been requested of the village. I've had multiple requests over the years on
Jeff,
Village Road.
Are there others out there that are already, that would request us to take over their roads?
There's Bretton Woods that requested us, but their roads were not up to standard, but there were a number of other structural issues with those roads. They didn't have this particular form of stormwater management in Bretton Woods, but we did reject their roads based on the fact that they did not meet village standards, or they could bring them up to village standards, and then we would have accepted them. However, it was not this particular kind of stormwater treatment that was part of the issue with that particular rejection of the roads.
Okay.
In managing these roads going forward, if we decide to grandfather them, is there some incremental cost? Is that the $1,000 you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, and I'm guessing that $1,000 to reestablish that diversion when that road was resurfaced, and that may be a high number. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just,
In that circumstance, you're only looking at the man hours to do it. Material is going to be the same. So it's just a matter of the man hours that it takes to shovel that asphalt in there.
And would the homeowners association be willing to pay for that?
Got a nice big balance in that HOA account?
No, we don't. We operate on a very slim margin. And again, most everybody that lives out there, like myself, we're retired. And so, you know, we don't have a passel of money that we can suddenly dig into or go to work or sell a few more condominiums or something, so.
Seems like the incremental costs would be rather low. So, okay, does anybody have more questions? Is anybody ready for a motion?
Don't think there is a motion, is there? This is guidance to the staff?
Looking for guidance.
Yeah.
yeah, what we need is guidance because we would need to bring back forth an ordinance for you
Okay.
to accept the roads under whatever conditions you set forth. That
Okay.
ordinance would also set speed limits and all the legal things that have
That's
to
right.
occur with the
Right,
road.
right.
And that road, according to the county, probably needs to have a name put on it. So there's
You
going to
have
be
no
some.
name on your road?
Right now, it is simply 120 Spring Lake Road, which is the entire subdivision,
Yeah.
and then it's the individual units. There would probably be a need to name two roads. We would name the
Okay.
main road and then the loop, and we don't have an issue with that.
That
That's
doesn't
fine.
cost much. No.
That's just aggravation, having changed everybody's address, but other than
Right,
that,
right,
not a
yeah.
problem.
Let's see if we can, okay.
Yeah, so that would be the
Excuse me.
requirement, an ordinance coming.
Mr. Farrell from the back wants to make a short, relevant comment.
Just a short comment. There's no lack of HOAs that don't have a lot of money and that have private roads. Having been president of Bretton Woods when Jeff and I talked about trying to get the roads transferred over. My concern is that how many HOAs can then look at this precedent? And so the precedent you're setting, I have a question. Is the precedent that we will accept this water diversion? Or is the precedent that we will accept roads that are not up to village standards? Because I think there's a big difference in those two precedents. And I think it needs to be made clear what precedent you're setting. That's my only concern, because I'm going back to the Bretton Woods issue there.
Good point, Jack.
Thank you.
I think the precedent is that we're accepting this water diversion as not being up to our standards.
Well, exactly, you're allowing that to be grandfathered in. Now, our roads
Right.
are up to standards. And my understanding is when Bretton Woods was not accepted in, it was because their roads were not up to standard. It was not because of any one small issue like we're talking about here tonight.
Let's see if we can reach consensus.
Did that answer your question, Jack? Did that answer your question? Which one? Yeah. Yeah.
Clarification.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see if we can reach consensus that we would like staff to go ahead and prepare the ordinance, and we would be accepting that diversion as a grandfathered situation that was approved by the village a long time ago, and just that diversion is what is nonconforming. Do we have consensus on that? Judy says no. John?
I would say there needs more work. I'm sorry.
More work?
Yeah.
There's really nothing else to say.
Yeah, I know. I just meant for them to work with staff to where Jeff is more comfortable. And I don't think we're close enough that you guys could fix the gap between now and then.
Mr. Boldry, how do you feel?
Is there an option here that looks like it's close to what we think we may want to do? Is it option 3 or something that looks like that we would
I
provide
think the
to staff?
option is we accept it with a non-conforming drainage issue, or we just don't accept it at all. There isn't any middle ground, is there?
Well, the middle ground, I think, is options 1 through 5, but
there they
probably
are.
accepting the main road but not the loop road is
Yeah.
kind of the
Yeah, option 3 seemed, I was more interested in that one.
And when I meant more work, I meant not with us, not to talk about it. I meant that it seems like more work between Jeff and the HOA needs to happen.
Like what kind of work?
I don't know, I was thinking like, come to some meeting of the minds that they mutually can present together, you know. I don't know what that,
Option 4 is, I think, what, option 4 is accept the roads and accept the diversion of the,
As is,
as is existing,
as an existing condition.
as an existing condition. That's option 4, if you all can look at it.
true, that is clearly there.
Option 5 is directed the staff to take some other option, but I don't know what other option there is.
Right.
Say take the loop road and don't take the main road.
That's option 1. That's option 1. Brenda Hiscott wants to speak.
I've sat here and listened to this and listened to this.
Yes.
If it works, why not accept it?
I mean, the precedent of people, a lot of people want to do this on their roads, and we don't want to encourage this because it's not according to our standards. We bury our,
Right, but
Yeah.
this was approved.
it was 20 years ago when
You agree that,
none of us even lived here.
Yeah, again, it's just not, it's up to a standard. It's up to an engineering standard, but it's not up to your way of doing business.
There you go.
Exactly.
But we normally make people adhere to our engineering.
I understand, and again, if we were looking for something to do, put this in today, brand new, I would probably feel the same way.
Yeah,
But since it's already there, it was approved by the village at that particular time, and it is in the village of Pinehurst, and we have been paying taxes for 17 years.
I understand.
And,
I
you
understand.
know, what we get is garbage collection and police protection.
Right.
So,
I would prefer option 4. If I could get 2 people to agree with me on option 4, we would have consensus for Jeff to go along and prepare an ordinance that would conform with option 4.
Could the HOA pay those expenses so you have some skin in the game on this and it's more consistent with what we do with other HOAs, which is estimated at less than $1,000?
You mean if it's $1,000
Yeah.
for the paving company to pave that hump?
I think it would make it more consistent with what we do in the past with,
Can you speak for the HOA? Okay,
I mean, I'm looking at you, Jeff.
yeah, that,
I can support option 4.
okay.
I could
so-
support that, and I would like to see them have a little bit of skin in the game on this.
Okay, that can all be written into that, can it, Jeff?
They would have some small skin in the game initially because there is another, some landscape stuff that we need to, and they've agreed that they would need to pull back out of adjacent to the road and some of that kind of stuff. But as far as the resurfacing of that diversion or that road, the loop road, the main road, I mean, I don't know when that would occur, and, you know, who's going to look back at the ordinance 10 years from now and say,
Yeah, well, that's-
oh, they were supposed to pay for that. So
That's
I think it'd
consistent
be a-
with what you guys got some refined work to do together, it sounds like, and bring
so
it
maybe
back to
that's an
us.
upfront
Yeah, I think
payment.
this is really the only point that I think we've had.
Right, okay.
I'm just trying to get to 4. I'm on 3, like Judy, and I'm trying to get there. Yeah, you know, and I thought that was a more consistent with what we do with other HOAs.
Prior approval.
Yeah.
No, I'd like 4, you know, not taking the loop is not taking half of the road. You okay with that, John Baldry?
I am, again, going back to option 3, as long as the diversion is present, as long as whatever that means, I would rather just say we're going to accept the road, option 4, we're going to accept the roads and accept the diversion as an existing condition, period.
That's number 4.
Are you okay with that, Mr. Cashin? Judy?
I'll stick with 3.
Okay, so we do have 3 people. Kevin, what did you say, 4? 3?
3.5.
Okay, 3.5. This is an auction. Can you give me 4? 3.5? Can you give me 4?
I just want to be honest with you.
Okay, we have consensus that option 4 would please the majority of the council. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Okay, our next item is other business. Do any council members have any other business that needs to come before the council? Okay, and then our final item is comments from attendees. Tom Campbell.
I'd like to call your attention to this day 17 years ago. We were in a council meeting over in the Village Hall on that day, and Steve Smith was mayor. And at that time, we got, and meeting started, by the way, at 9 o'clock. And about 9:30, or roughly that, somebody came in and whispered in his ear, and all of a sudden he says, this meeting's adjourned. We're all going home and watch television, and we've been attacked. I just thought historically that's
right.
I'll never forget it.
That's right, because you used to meet at 9 and at 1. I was employed by Moy County at the time, and I was up at the county office, but I had a meeting up in Raleigh that day with Travis Marshall. Anybody remember him? He's been around forever. And I said, you know what? I'm going to my meeting with Travis Marshall. But I listened to the radio all the way up and back. Colleen.
Colette Kalinsky.
Colette.
In reference to the earlier buffer zone ordinance, I'm kind of with Judy because I was at the P&Z meeting where it was approved. And if you noticed, as the gentleman here kept talking, at the end he sort of slid in, well, not just for 5, maybe we could do 211 and some of the other areas. Well, at the P&Z meeting, it was even kind of slid in that this could be applied to residential areas too.
Ooh, no, I'm, well,
Yes, so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Colette. I am adamant that the Highway Corridor Overlay District only applies to commercial property. So we're not going to, and you can have, I mean, there used to be 3 different districts, rural, hamlet, and, you know, so we could do something separate for 5 since there are a total of 4 properties. Any other comments from attendees? Okay, then we shall adjourn this meeting. All in favor of adjourning this meeting? Aye?
Aye.
Aye. And we will go into